Welcome to this 3-part mini-series centered around deep listening, the life work of composer, musician, writer, and humanitarian Pauline Oliveros. I'm Sharon Stewart, a creator of soundworks, musician, researcher, poet, and deep listener. Welcome to the second episode, Deep Listening and Reciprocal Listening with Tina Pearson. To begin, I'd like to take a closer listen to what Pauline Oliveros means with Sonosphere, a term I introduced briefly in the first episode. In a 2006 article, Improvisation in the Sonosphere, written for Contemporary Music Review, Oliveros gives us an idea. Quote, "The sonosphere is a sonorous or sonic envelope of the earth that is comprised of two irrevocably interwoven layers, the biospheric layer and the technospheric layer. Humans sense the sonosphere according to the bandwidth, resonant frequencies, and mechanics of the ear, skin, bones, meridians, fluids, and other organs and tissues of the body, which are coupled to the earth and its many layers, from the core out to the magnetic fields. All cells and molecules of the earth and body vibrate, and these vibrations are transmitted through this complex network to the auditory cortex and nervous system, where they become sound. Some of the most beautiful sounds in the world are produced in the biosphere by the cries of creatures such as the loon, coyote, spring peepers, tree frogs, and cicadas. From the technosphere, we have the beauty of carefully crafted acoustic signal sounds such as train whistles, foghorns, and bells, sounds that were once integral parts of our communities. I have noticed, listened to, and grown with the changing sounds of both layers of the sonosphere through my lifetime. My personal approach to improvisation is centered in the sonosphere. I listen to everything that I can possibly perceive in order to tune to and flow with the sonosphere. I listen inclusively so that virtually any sound, with some exceptions, can be acknowledged and incorporated as part of my piece, regardless of its origin. I call it Pauline's orchestration." End quote. You can hear Pauline herself recount 2 performance stories at a masterclass for Sonic Acts in 2012.
If you're actually listening to everything that's going on, then everything becomes a part, becomes connected to what's going on, and so then it's not a conflict anymore. So I'll tell you a couple of stories about my own performances. I was playing in Vancouver, in Canada, in a very nice wooden building. It had been a church, and it was made of beautiful wood, and it was very resonant. It had a wonderful feeling. You could play and get very nice reflections back. And so I was doing a solo, and I'm playing along, and about 45 minutes into my solo, fire engines went by outside. The sirens were resonating through the building, and I'm playing with that because I was including the sirens and listening to them, and I wasn't disturbed or conflicted about it. And when I finished, people came to talk to me. There were not 1 but 3 different people separately saying to me, "How did you get the fire engines to go by on time?"
You can listen further to the second example in the link to the masterclass in the podcast notes. As you can hear, this talk to a group of primarily musicians or sound artists highlights the relationship a musician can have with the whole of their sonic environment while they are playing. As my practice with deep listening developed with my practice as a field recordist, I became more and more fascinated with this idea presented in Oliveros' 1976 article on sonic meditation in Software for People, in which she examines the process of performing Sonic Meditation 1, Teach Yourself to Fly. concerning observation of the breathing cycle, she writes, quote, observation meaning to remain attentive and aware without consciously manipulating or interfering with the observed, end quote. But asking the question later, is it possible to observe the breath cycle without disturbing it? Quoting Otto R. Frisch from Atomics Physics Day in 1961, quote, every observation we make is bound to act on the object we observe, even if only by the impact of a single quantum of light. In other words, there is always a mutual interaction between the observer and the object, end quote. As we listen to our environment is listening to us. We reciprocally shape the sonosphere with our mutual listening. More recently, for me primarily through the writings of Jane Bennett, Erin Manning, and Brian Masumi, I've started becoming more curious about the agency of things and how I might tune down or shake up these categories of observer and the object. One of the scores that I've shared at 2 deep listening events in Pressmont, Sweden in 2019 is called Nonverbal Communing with Beings in Your Environment. This score calls upon the ability of the performer to access the permeability of their senses and the permeability of their very being in an environment, to tap into the mutual listening, to listen to the environment listening to you, and to stop and engage non-verbally, something I discussed at the beginning of the first podcast in this mini-series. It also draws upon the ability of the performer to tap into movement, impulse, relaxing the mind into an open and receptive state, receptive to internal and external stimuli. The score also resonates with vital materialism and a desire to commune with the more than human. For those who would like to perform the score, I invite you to find a place, inside or outside, to listen to the following instructions and then pause your device while you perform the score. Nonverbal Communing with Beings in Your Environment, solo version by Sharon Stewart, 2019. Soften your eyes and your vision. Feel the first impulse to start moving in a certain direction. Move and sense. Sense when a lively being in your surroundings would like to commune with you. Give that being your attention. Would it like to move with you? You engage in a nonverbal movement conversation. Would it like to sound with you? You engage in a nonverbal sounding conversation. Would it like you to listen to it? You engage through listening. Would it like you to engage through another sense? You engage through that sense. When the engagement has come to an end, do a closing ritual that feels good to you. Wait for the impulse to start walking again and begin the process anew. Stop when the impulse to converse with your surroundings subsides. So, enjoy the communing. You can now pause your device. Welcome back. The score you just performed feels like kin to another score that I came across last year, composer Tina Pearson's Toward a Reciprocal Listening created for World Listening Day 2020. She'll be reading an excerpt following her interview, and you can find a link to the full score in the podcast notes. This score and Tina's thoughts are also in close relationship to the interview with Amer Kangiser in the 3rd episode of Sounding Places, Listening Places. In our conversation, I asked Tina to share with us aspects of her personal experience and the context of listening societies in which Toward a Reciprocal Listening was created and shared, including her relationship to deep listening.
And thanks for inviting me to talk about this. It's become an important score for me. World Listening Day it's a signature event of the World Listening Project, and that is a United States organization that was started in, I think, 2008. World Listening Day itself, the first one was 2010, and it happens annually on July 18th. And it happens on that day because it is the birthday of R. Marie Schaefer, who is a Canadian composer, music educator, and author, he established the World Soundscape Project at Simon Fraser University in the late 60s, and it was active through the early 70s as a response to increasing noise pollution. I think even if you think about what the world soundscape might have been like in the late 60s compared to now, whether you're in a city or rural, it's quite different. And of course, at the same time, if you know the history of audio equipment, we were starting to get portable recording equipment. So all of this happened, kind of simultaneously. So they spent a lot of time out just recording, just trying to find out what was happening and recording the environment. So that was the World Soundscape Project. And Hildegard Westerkamp and Barry Truax, who are both quite known for their work in soundscape composition, were part of that first group that started the World Soundscape Project. And then that evolved into a global organization called the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology. And that started in 1993. And again, it was now more global. It was multidisciplinary. So there were people involved with ecology, biology, sound, a lot of different fields came together around concern for the soundscape locally and globally. And the World Listening Project focuses on bringing awareness to listening through field recording and radio broadcast primarily. The theme for the World Listening Day 2020 was made by Catherine Krause, who's the partner of Bernie Krause. And Catherine was responding, I think, to COVID, and the collective feel, the theme. I'll just read it to you. She wrote this beautiful kind of little poem. There is something new afoot. The field itself is changing. The creature world knows. The creative one does too. So what does it mean now to listen? How do we express what we know? Be alert, individually and in concert. There is sanctity in it, amid new conditions. Travel the field and explore, by call and response, the rhythm within. How does your song fit within the collective chorus? The theme for World Listening Day didn't have to do with field recording necessarily. So I was thinking a lot about just generally listening and being in the field. And I have been thinking for quite a while about the idea of reciprocity, about what, when we're going out into the field and when we're listening, is the environment that we're listening to getting something from us, or are we just taking? So there's terms that are kind of commonly referred to around this are extraction. So the extraction mentality. So if I'm, and I've done this myself, if we're going out into the environment to record something that we're going to bring and then manipulate it and process it and make a piece of music. So I'm already out of that environment. I'm going to make a piece of music for that, and then I'm going to put it in a concert hall. And so what is the relationship of that piece and my intention and my listening to the trees or the water or the birds that I've recorded? Does it make a difference to them? And how am I reflecting their agency in what I do? And then beyond that, do I have any right to go there and record in that place? What am I bringing? Are my footsteps bringing something there that is damaging? How I am in that place and what I'm seeing, is there something that I should be giving back? The word reciprocity it's being used more and more. One of a Canadian Indigenous scholar, Leanne Batasamasaki Simpson, wrote about it, and I'll just read this quote that she's talking about Indigenous in general, Indigenous people here in North America. Our bodies are not just informed by, but created and maintained by relationships of deep reciprocity. Our bodies exist only in relation to indigenous complex, non-linear constructions of time, space, and place that are continually rebirthed through the practice and often coded recognition of obligations and responsibilities within a nest of diversity, freedom, consent, non-interference, and a generated, proportional, emergent reciprocity. I come from a hunting and gathering family, and so, my experience from a child listening in the wilderness, if you're going hunting, you're listening really differently than if you're going berry picking, and that's quite different than if you're going field recording, So it's or in the fall, mushrooms, and the sound in the different seasons is so different. If I'm fishing, my listening is different. So I think that there's always that question is, what is my relationship? Am I listening to the ground and what's under the ground? Am I listening to what's inside these trees? Am I listening to how the water is speaking? Do I have a sense of belonging here? And can I listen for a welcome? And that's something that for me has become more of a practice rather than a goal. So it's always a practice because there will always be a different response.
I asked Tina what she felt she was offering to the community with her score, which is part of a call by New Adventures in Sound Art to be implemented for field recordists' contributions to a curated sound map, Radio Apori.
I was very curious and interested in what might happen if a number of people are asking themselves these questions and putting themselves in this uncomfortable and vulnerable position, really, is what I was asking people to do, to really listen in a different way before they record, not to preconceive what they might record. And so what might come in that listening? Can we listen to the listening? I guess, in other words, can we listen? Is it going to change how the field recordist places their equipment? And then from them listening to what wants to be heard or what voices want to be recorded, how might that change how that project manifests itself? It's hard to say. I met Pauline Oliveros in 1979, and this was before Deep Listening. She had written the Sonic Meditations in 1974, and meeting Pauline and being exposed to those Sonic Meditations and working with them really changed me fundamentally. I think the realm of possibilities that she, as a woman, it was quite a male world I was in, for sure, in new music in Toronto. And I think that her very, very deep and moving practice and encouragement of others to be in this practice really it did inform me a lot. So I think that Pauline's influence and my own deep listening practice in association with that practice definitely impacted the score or my writing of it.
In the following, Tina Pearson offers the approach section of her score toward a reciprocal listening. Please press pause wherever you would like to take more time.
Recording for Sharon Stewart, a portion of the score toward a reciprocal listening. And this is Tina Pearson. Pause to take a moment for your body to settle. In stillness, observe your breath cycle. Allow a pause in the spaces between inhales and exhales to allow your body to come to a deeper breath rhythm. Let your attention slowly scan your inner body landscape from inside your head, down through your fingers, inside your torso, down your legs to your toes. Allow any needed shifts, sighs, and relaxations. Observe and recognize any sensations and emotions that arise, considering them textures of this inner landscape. Is it possible to listen from inside your breath rhythm? To listen through your skin? Is it possible to listen through your eyes? To listen through your hands? To listen through your feet? To listen from below your feet? And to listen simultaneously from above your head? Continuing to be aware of your breath rhythm and your opened sensations, let your attention slowly move outward to the elements of the place where you are. Let your senses, perceptions, and imagination explore the environment's textures, smells, sounds, and colors.
Thank you, Tina. In May of 2020, I was approached by Michiel Huisman of Soundtrack City with the question of whether I would participate with other artists in creating a home listening guide, a sort of do-it-yourself home expedition proposed through 4 different listening modes or listening perspectives. As for the focus on sounds heard at home, the project shared some remarkable similarities with the work of Elise Hart, who speaks about her Institute for Domestic Sound in the 2nd episode of Sounding Places, Listening Places. I ended up composing 4 scores from the embodied listening mode. You can experience all the scores with a free PDF of Homing Inside Out, a listening guide for home quarantine, found at the link in the podcast notes. Becoming curious about my own listening habits has made me acutely aware of the possibilities as well as limits of human hearing, and curious about what, for example, a spider hears in terms of sensing vibrations. My artistic practice centered on the figure of the transformative spider during my deep listening certification process. I admit I have many visible spiders in my piano studio, and we live around each other, to the distress of some of my students. So I had to include a spider score, of course. This one is called Becoming Spider. It has 4 parts, and after each one is a long pause. As with the other scores, you can pause your device to take more time. Homing Inside Out, a listening guide for home quarantine. Sharon Stewart, Embodied Listening, Score 3, Becoming Spider. Center yourself low in the middle of a room. Feel sensitive hairs extend from the surface of your body, designed to catch and augment vibrational energy. Listen with your new, hairy sensilla. When you are ready, instinctively move toward a corner of the room or close to or under an object where you feel safe. Make yourself comfortable in that space. Listen with your sensilla. Spin a web of listening throughout the room. Listen with your sensilla. Which sounds stuck in your web? Centering oneself in and creatively responding to the Sonosphere, through listening and responding to all that one can sense, inner worlds and outer worlds, in the whole space-time continuum, non-hierarchically, communally, and reciprocally. This is one facet of deep listening and an evolving contribution to the ecosystem of ethical listening and recording practices within the field recording and acoustic ecology communities. In the final podcast of this Deep Listening mini-series, I'll be touching on deep listening as a source of inspiration for creating and performing, with our special guest, Lisa E. Harris, who was interviewed in episode 3 of the podcast, Sounding Places, Listening Places.